everybody, and welcome to episode 2 of the second season of the IMG podcast. Really pleased to have you with us again. We've got quite a big topic today, so we've got quite a bit to get through, so I might speak quickly. As always, I'm joined by Richard Johnson, my co-founder.
Hello.
And today, we've got a couple of people with us today, so I'm going to quickly introduce them, and then I'm going to set this up as, like I said, got quite a bit to cover. So first up, we've got Kamila, who is currently working for the eComplete Group, and she's also a member of our community. Hey, Kamila.
Hello.
And we are also joined by Alec Frusher. Hi, Alec.
Hi there.
So Alec is from a slightly different world to the normal marketing world that we talk to here. Alec is currently head of people for San Digital. He's also worked in talent acquisition for BJSS, the Access Group, and Experience. So we've got a HR person with us today. So what are we talking about today? So this is going to be a really interesting conversation. Well, I hope it's going to be interesting, and I hope you agree. But there's obviously been loads of news and changes in the world of work over the last 2 years. And what we're going to talk about today is the battle for talent over, or is it just getting started? So we've obviously had what was being called the Great Resignation through COVID. And recent labour force surveys found that resignations rose sharply from the end of 2020, significantly exceeding pre-pandemic levels. And then in Q3 of 2021, that was the highest level of resignation since Q1 of 2019. And then while Q1 of 2021 showed a bit of signs of slowing off, might be Christmas, but it still remained higher than the pre-pandemic level. So basically people just quitting their jobs. And I guess what's most interesting is that now, while wages seem to be climbing, employers are offering bonuses just to recruit staff, the labour market's actually smaller. So the ONS released some statistics that indicate that there are now actually 500,000 less people in the labour market than there were before the pandemic. So that means the labour market shrunk by 2% in the first quarter of 2022, which means that the country has actually done 11 million fewer working hours than it did at the start of 2020. So the market shrunk, which is actually contributing to inflation. Now, the Bank of England, this is a massive concern for, and actually the governor, Andrew Bailey, he was giving testimony saying that he expected that actually when the economy opened back up, people would go back to work and the sort of economy would get going again. But actually that hasn't happened. And the Resolution Foundation think tank, they have seen no evidence that the sort of pandemic-induced inactivity is showing any signs of reversing. Obviously, you can then add on to the fact that there's 110,000 EU nationals in the first quarter of this year that aren't here versus 2019. And all of this is sort of combining to mean that unemployment in the UK is now at its lowest rate since 1974, which is sort of even before I was born, even before you were born, Rich, right? And in terms of the people that have left the job market, maybe unsurprisingly on the surface of it, over half of those sort of 500,000 people were in the 50 to 64 age bracket. But actually, those folk, they're not quite at retirement age. But what they're doing is, I guess, they've been in their jobs and they're not coming back. And it's kind of interesting in terms of how people reevaluating what's important to them and where they want to spend their time and what they want to do with their time. And actually, a study in Microsoft's 2021 Work Trend Index also reported that they surveyed 25,000 people. 74% of them said that the pandemic has made them consider their job or their career choices. And on LinkedIn's own podcast, they were talking about this, and they sort of said that people have realized that life's too short to do a job you don't love or for a company that you don't think cares about you. So there's a lot of stuff going on, and that same LinkedIn research found that 41 people are considering leaving their jobs within the next year. So there's a whole heap of stuff going on. I haven't even mentioned the cost of living crisis. We've got flexible working, the 4-day week. We've got Elon Musk's email that's demanded everybody go back to the office and how divisive that's been. So basically, in a nutshell, what on earth is going on? what has happened and what's going to happen in the future. Hopefully this is going to be really interesting, and I'm really keen to hear what people think. So folks, last 2 years, what's it been like? Alec, I really want to start with you because we speak to a lot of marketers, and I want to know what it's
Sure.
like from a recruiter side, from a HR person side.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first thing to say is that, really interesting stats that look at the labor market as a whole. I think clearly my lens, just to, thanks for the introduction, but is on primarily tech sector. That's really the full focus of my role at BGSS, which has been the most of my experience over that last couple of years. Huge changes over probably each 6 months period over the last 2 years. I think, for example, you saw some people who, when COVID hit, were on furlough or in businesses that they seem to identify as higher risk. At that time, those people probably moved for under their market rate because they were thinking they were going to lose their job. Fast forward a year or less, and the market is so buoyant in technology that companies may have hired people under market rate, and then that rate has risen. Companies, even ones that are really great at trying to retain their people, step up salaries through salary review processes, can't then keep up with where the market has moved to over that period of time. So I think that is something that we have seen generally in the market. One of the things as well that is a big ongoing thing is that remote working culture or want that people have. Again, in technology, I think we've been an industry that has adopted some of that already throughout our history because of the nature of our roles, and have been able to do that, and more so is something that people seem to want. Interestingly, one of the things that we're seeing is companies that have perhaps offered what they're terming remote contracts are then 6 months down the line saying, oh, actually, come into London once every few weeks now. And my view is that's not really a remote role. That's probably less of a remote role than perhaps I've offered as part of my organizations, but we call it a hybrid role. So I think one of the things that will be interesting to see, and I'm interested in other people's view, is how that develops, how much, to your point about the likes of Elon Musk, how much people stick to that, as leaders or as a company culture. But one important thing, which I think doesn't get brought up very often, is that nature of all of our roles being remote by definition due to COVID, and more remote working generally, I think brings less engagement that employees have with their company. They're less connected to that company and those employees, which then as a result means they perhaps move on quicker because they don't have that connection that they might have had if they were in the office. So I think actually what you're seeing is all those factors flowing through, as well as many of the others. But I think we're still in such a position of seeing how that goes. We're in the middle of it, and trying to work out what it all means. So I think it will be a while before we really, understand where things are at, what people really want. People themselves think, yeah, I want remote working, but I know people who then a year later have gone, do you know what? I miss an office. I miss, collaborating with colleagues in whatever way. And I think, it's this middle ground. People don't want to be 5 days a week in an office. That has, I think, changed for good as much as it possibly can, but somewhere in between full remote and in the office 5 days a week. But I think people are still working it out for themselves as well.
I don't know where to begin on all of that.
Yeah.
That you've touched on so many elements there, and I was jotting down while you were talking. So one thing I've not considered, loyalty. In actual, it's a lot easier to build about loyalty within a business when you're in and you're drinking the Kool-Aid. But if you're remote, businesses have to work a lot harder. So actually, yeah, people always say, don't they, that oh, I'm not, I won't necessarily miss the company, I'll miss the people. But it's harder to build up that rapport if you're working remotely. What do you do with that? One thing you really touched on was, I think to summarize a lot of that is it still goes back to it's an employee's market here. They're demanding a lot more. And actually, one word I wrote down was control. And it was almost about, you were saying around some people don't want to work in the office, some people do want to work in the office. Previously, that was never a discussion. It was dictated by the company. I think now the individuals are controlling that conversation. You know, previous companies, if I wanted to work from home, had to fill in a form and get that approved by HR. That's now an open conversation in the office. And one thing which hit me like a bullet of the conversations which I've had with many people in the past over the last sort of 6 months is what's been offered today is not the reality now. So yes, I was told it could be fully remote, and now there's almost this underlying pressure. Can you come to that meeting on Monday? Or why don't you just come into the office on a Monday? And I've spoken to 3 or 4 or 5 people in the last sort of 6 months where they've actually resigned from that job, going back to control, own it, because what they were promised on day one has slowly sort of drifted away and gone back to we'd like you in the office more than not, really. Sorry, not what I signed up to.
What's your sort of observations then, Kamila, over the last, because you've gone through the cycle, right, from employment to freelance back to employment?
Yeah, pretty much. And it was definitely a roller coaster for me. And I think every single thing that all 3 of you have mentioned had an impact on me personally and people around me as well. You know, for me, I went freelance in the middle of the pandemic, early days into my career as well. I was only 2 years after I left uni, and I went freelance without contracts waiting for me too, without clients waiting for me, with little savings, and I just went for it. And I'd never imagined that I would have done. I think 2 things led to that for me. One is I experienced and I watched so many people around me, my flatmates, my friends, my colleagues, my family lose their jobs that seemed so secure, you know, people who were, you know, starting off really great careers. And, you know, very often, like, as young people, we're told that there's risk of like losing your job if you do something bad, or, you know, becoming redundant. Very often we've seen it around people sort of higher up, people who are older. Like that's what we were used to seeing in terms of redundancies and things like that. And next thing you know, every single one of my friends lost their job within like those 6 months. I was even going to leave the company I was at to another job, and I lost my job offer when I was 3 weeks into my notice period and had to beg the company to let me stay, a company I didn't want to stay at. And, you know, all of that came from COVID, but also not directly just from COVID. Some of it just came from other things that tumbled down because of what was happening with COVID. And I watched all of that, and I think that resulted in 2 things: sort of lack of fear and lack of loyalty. That's what it resulted for me with, because one, I had to face that fear. I watched every single one around me suddenly face that fear of being jobless. That used to seem like the worst thing in the world, something that would crumble down, and just like that's hitting rock bottom, not having a job lined up, not having that security. And we were all forced to see it. Even if every single person, at least maybe in this country, with COVID happening, you are either faced with it yourself, or you watch someone close to you, someone you know, go through that, you know, go through either losing your job or losing your hours or something similar to that. And, you know, once you face that fear, suddenly you realize it's not the end of the world, because we were forced to go through it. Suddenly the idea of not having that exact job lined up, not having like that security, that paycheck, it was, you know, it's still risky, but we realized so many of us lived through it and we survived and we learned from it. And then the other part was loyalty, Richard, as you mentioned as well. Loyalty, like the company I was with, working before I went freelance, they had a lot of perks in the office. We had parties and Prosecco and, you know, all sorts of different things, but actually the culture was really toxic. And when we were all working from home, suddenly we realized that without all those things, we didn't, you know, nothing was covering our eyes from everything that was actually going in the company. There was nothing to distract us from there that they did in the office. And, you know, at the same time, watching everyone around me sort of losing their jobs, you know, I sort of realized, you know, why that loyalty isn't there within me, with my friends anymore, because we just realized that, you know, working for employers isn't secure anymore, and they could drop you very, very quickly. And many companies did, even companies who ended up coming on top of COVID and making even more profits. A lot of those profits started off first with, you know, letting people go. And yeah, so that loyalty just disappeared. So, you know, take those two and suddenly, I don't know, I felt fearless, you know, I felt like everything turned around for me. Yeah, and yeah, you know, whilst I was freelance, I had the opportunity to go back full time, and you know, I actually ended up choosing to stay freelance because I felt like I needed to be in control of that. And like you said, I did actually come full circle. I'm in a permanent role now, and funnily enough, it's a role that actually, you know, I didn't expect I'd go for. It's a 5-day role. It's actually makes less money than I made freelance, but it just gave me the flexibility that I wanted. And the only reason I think I actually considered full-time rather than freelance is because the system just wasn't ready for me to be freelance. You know, I struggled to apply for, I struggled to apply for like apartments and things like that, and that's what was made really difficult for me. But I knew as soon as I started looking for a full-time role that the most important thing for me was that control, like you said, and being able to know. And now I work remotely. I have a team under me of people living in all sorts of different countries, an international team, and I have flexibility, and I think that's what's important for me.
Yeah. So really interesting, and I think some of the points you made there are really insightful, Kamila. And so Richard and I were talking earlier today, and there's a few bits and bobs in there I just want to pick up on. So I think it's really interesting that you highlighted the culture thing, because I think, you know, the classic free fruit Wednesday, you know, ping pong table. Alec, you'll know this, right? Working in the tech sector, right? This is standard sort of perks. But does, when, like you say, Kamila, when you're not actually in the office to enjoy those benefits, is there any culture at all? And then you just go, well, I could just be doing this for anybody or from anywhere for more money.
I was just looking through actually, because I'd seen a stat and I found it now, that basically that's it. One of the reasons I think Hayes did a study and they quoted Bamboo HR, and they talked about when people went remote, it was in their own home then. And then actually they had time to think, and without all of that camaraderie and that office kind of environment, as it were, they realised they just didn't actually like the job, and it was being masked by everything going in, and that contributed to people just going, do you know what? No, you talk about fear, Kamila. You lost that fear, and you went, do you know what? Yeah, I'm done. I'm going to resign, and it clearly happened to that. And again, one thing which I wrote down as well, talking about that, what we've got to remember as well is COVID was massive. So a lot of things happen after a life-changing event. So for argument's sake, that if somebody, God forbid, close to you dies or whatever, and they haven't, they die young or whatever that looks like, they don't make retirement, those people around them, and that kind of circle is generally quite small. They have that sort of light bulb moment where they go, I need to make a change, I need to go to the gym more to get fit, or I need to do this. They have that real moment of self-reflection. This wasn't a localized issue. This was COVID. This was global. So it's almost like instead of, 10,000 people going through it on any one day, there was a whole world going through these life-changing moments. And yeah, it just makes people think differently.
Have you seen that, Alec, in terms of the requests or demands that people want, need, expect? Have they radically changed, or has it become slightly more narrow in terms of just pay me more money?
Yeah, you're right. I think there has been a shift in priority. I think some of those perks, as we talk about, have fallen down the list. I think interestingly, so there's I'm based in Nottingham. There's a great tech community in Nottingham through Tech Nottingham, and there's a lot of chat on there about various things. And I think the second most important thing is pension, and I think that's always an important thing. But I think that's probably gone up the list, which is an interesting thing. I don't, and because Kamila was talking about risk, and there's two ways of looking at that. There's a way of looking at it that says some individuals will be thinking, okay, cost of living, is going up, therefore security is the most important thing with a role potentially. However, we're talking about a sector where is hugely in demand. We're talking about fairly highly paid people compared to average, and people look at it the other way, which is, okay, if I move and it doesn't work out, I can walk into another job with no problems whatsoever. So I can take a risk. So it's a really interesting mix of individuals who have slightly different perspectives. But I think we are seeing people taking those risks because the market is so buoyant, and because, to Richard's point earlier, they feel they have the control, whereas previously, even in markets that still were niche roles, etc., I think people were a little bit more risk averse. But we're certainly seeing salaries going up. One of the things, talking about being a Midlands based talent acquisition specialist, is that organizations that are, let's say, London companies are saying, okay, well, we can offer remote, we can go and speak to people in Nottingham, let's say, on a Nottingham salary that would traditionally be a very good salary for Nottingham, but we can offer them less than we'd have to do in London, but still quite a bit more than that traditional good Nottingham salary. So that's what we're definitely seeing, from the organization I've worked with the last couple of years. There have been several people that have moved on to that type of role and seen a significant salary increase because of that.
And I think that's one thing you could see changing, isn't it? Is actually, London weighted, or whatever it was called before, where roles in London used to get paid more because that took into consideration the commute and the cost of living down in London. Actually, now you're exactly right. And when we used to recruit, Dave, you used to have your Nottingham office, you'd have a 30-mile radius where that's really where nobody's going to do more than that. Well, right now, I could get the best person may live in Ipswich, but it's no longer an issue if your business is flexible. I'm going to ask you a question, Kamila, actually, because you talk, again, going back to risk. Do you feel more secure now in your full-time job than you did being a freelancer?
You know what? I don't see a difference. Like I said, there were a few small reasons why, it's maybe a better opportunity, maybe for right now or for like a specific moment in time. Like I said, something as silly as applying for an apartment or something like that. But no, because I just realized that either way, that risk exists. I think, like, risk of losing your role. Like I said, I watched so many people losing their roles, and I don't really see that much of a difference. And at the same time, after being freelance and after working with so many different clients, and so I realized that as what's been said earlier, that people realize that even if they don't find something, you can probably just walk into a role, even if it's not your ideal role. And especially with the way that everything is right now, you sort of, you start seeing that there's so many roles out there. And obviously if there's a labor shortage, it almost makes it feel like we're in control, right? We're in control to be able to lose a job, leave a job, change a job, and then even if it doesn't work out, we'll find one. It almost seems like that opportunity's out there. And with risk as well, I think it's really important, maybe, at least for me, a big factor was that I don't have any commitments. So when I went freelance and when I've been changing jobs and sort of, choosing between jobs, I didn't have to think about kids. I didn't have to think about a mortgage. I didn't have to think about a partner. Nothing was even keeping me where I am, sort of location wise. And I think a lot of people from my generation are a bit similar, because we all know, I don't really have the stats on this, but obviously we were aware that people are having kids later or less. People, for cultural reasons, sort of changing culture, but also changing, economy. People my age, we don't really get mortgages. We're not capable of it. And maybe that came with like a silver lining, that because of that, we don't have those commitments to worry about right now.
I think the question, yeah, and I agree with all that. And I think the more sort of lasered into that, Dave and I often talk about this, is the fact that a notice period traditionally has provided that comfort to people. It's almost like, oh, I'm on a month's notice, I'm on 3 months' notice. But actually what COVID, I think, did was proved that if the company needs to get rid of you, that notice period is irrelevant, for want of a better way. You're no more secure with a notice period when you are freelance. And I guess that was the question I was getting to. And it's great you don't feel any difference, because I think that ultimately is right.
Yeah, definitely. That's a really good point. We used to have a lot of conversations with our friends when we were signing new contracts, for new jobs, what's your notice period like? And now we don't even we're not even concerned about that, because we realize that's something that a lot of companies have waived in the past. And yeah, like you said, it's no different at this point than if you were freelance. It's just as risky, you know, that client or that company can stay with you, or they can get rid of you, I guess.
And I should point out, obviously, legally, notice periods are paid, but you don't have to work them. But equally, yeah, it is kind of, you could walk into a building today and be out of that building today. Yes, paid up, but it's not a security blanket.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But and again, this may be because of the sort of where the market is at the moment. Obviously, there's an abundance of jobs and there's a demand for talent. So it almost feels like if it didn't work out wherever for whatever reason, you could just go and get another job, which we know is not always easy for everybody in every sector or every situation. But do you think that just because of the nature of what the market's been like over the last couple of years in particular, and you know, because you're relatively young in your career, is that a factor? And I guess, Alec, are you seeing more of the similar sort of attitude amongst folk that you're recruiting in the last sort of 2 to 3 years versus what it was like before, when there were less opportunities and more people around?
I don't think I am sort of seeing that, or it's not a clear, you know, pattern or you know, hard to drill down onto that, I guess, and see. I mean, one thing that is sort of related to that is interesting is because, you know, there's such a war for talent, or again, you know, to use some terminology that you might have seen out there, is companies, you know, taking a less rigorous approach to assessing people, and equally whether people are getting the opportunity to see what they're getting themselves into. Because when, you know, there's such competition out there, you know, as a talent acquisition leader, we get told, hey, I'm interviewing for 4 other jobs. This other company, I came in and they offered me a job on the same day. Well, you know, they may have met one person. You know, I've worked at places that, you know, we want to try and do a rigorous process to make sure it's right for the candidate and right for us. But, you know, that, you know, creates, you know, a longer process, which creates the risk that they're going to get a job elsewhere in the meantime. So some companies are really shortening their process to be as lean as possible. But my question is, yeah, are they getting a robust decision on whether this person is right for them? And then on the flip side, is that person seeing enough of that organization, the people they might be working with, to make a really informed decision? So I think that's, you know, a challenge for the industry at the moment to get the right balance, because as talent acquisition folks, you know, we're at the mercy of whatever targets that we have, and are trying to, you know, strike that right balance. So, you know, I'm interested in other people's thoughts on that as well.
We see that in our business. So basically what we do is we provide talent to organizations, and we find that the nimble businesses who act quickly get the talent. We've been through numerous sort of conversations where we've said, you know, for argument's sake, Kamila's amazing, you know, have a conversation with Kamila. If they dilly-dally on that conversation and it takes 1 or 2 weeks to organise it, and then they come back and go, oh yeah, can we see Kamila like next week? No, she's gone elsewhere. And that happens more than people think. And yeah, it's almost, yeah, well, you said war on talent, shortage of talent. I don't know what it is, but there is people are trying to hire the best people more so than ever now, without a doubt. And it's tough. And I think you've got to be quick, but you've got to have the right checks and balances in. Agile is the word. That's it from 2 years ago. You've got to be agile.
Absolutely. I mean, one thing I will say is that, you know, I'm amazed, and you talk about control, but I'm amazed at how things have shifted. So, for example, you know, when organizations aren't great at providing feedback or don't provide any feedback, understandably, that gets called out. You see social media posts and those type of things, and Glassdoor and services like that. What I've found in the last year is that, you know, let's say someone has a final interview today, and you get a call an hour before and go, oh, I accepted a job yesterday. You know, or they don't attend the interview, and then you call them and say, what happened? I accepted a job yesterday. You know, that's not something that you, in the same way that you would put on social media to call out a candidate. But if a company did that, you'd say, what's going on? But that for me is a, you know, that happens so much more, and is an indicator of that shift in control, as per the first sort of conversation. So I'm amazed that does happen surprisingly regularly. Yeah. Yeah.
So I think
thought about that.
there's anecdotal evidence then, right, that this is definitely an employees market at the moment.
Absolutely. I'm interested to look back on sort of salaries, because we started to get into it a little bit, and then because I think, David, you mentioned at the start around, access to more data around that type of thing, and I do definitely see that people understand their value in the market a lot more through those tools like Glassdoor or whatever salaries that they might see. I think people do their research more, and really do know their value, which again is a generally, I think, a good thing, because people should, but that definitely has also been a shift for me. So I don't know if other people have found that as well.
So Alec, are you? I'm not expecting to give confidential information away, but are you? Because Dave and I had this conversation earlier on today. Obviously, a lot of businesses work on bench sort of ranges, and we'll pay between this and this to get the talent in. Are you finding you're moving higher up those quartiles now? So let's random numbers. A role pays between 50 and 80, and previously you could, I'll use the term getaway, you could be lower quartiles. I'm paying 50 to 60 grand for this role now. Are you finding pre-pandemic you're moving up those quartiles and having to pay more for the same, or not?
I would say broadly, yes. The organizations that I work at now, and most recently actually are consultancy organizations, and we've had quite a sort of a flat structure, so we don't have levels, junior, senior, etc. So we take a slightly different view of it, and bands aren't quite as we don't have salary bands in the same sort of way. But yeah, in terms of have things change in terms of needing to pay more, yeah, I think that's true. I think the market factors we discussed, clearly inflation, cost of living, people are doing that, but I think they just know their value more, probably have a few conversations. They realize that, hey, I can go out there and continue my interview process and see. And again, talking about control, I think not too many, but we see candidates essentially accept an offer and then continue interviewing elsewhere. That's probably always happened, but it's probably even more common now, because they think, well, I'll see what offer I can get elsewhere, maybe play people off against the other. Not something that happens regularly, but definitely more so than I experienced at other times in my career hiring people.
And do you think we ultimately get to a position where the businesses with the deepest pockets will get the best talent? I mean, that's probably always been the case anyway, right? But
yeah, I think it's an interesting question. I think, people who are the ones that are going to go for the role, looking at it from a monetary basis, again, as a business, if we offer someone a role and they want to really negotiate and are playing hardball, we genuinely question, okay, even if we think we have some room to maneuver, are they the right person for our business, for our culture, because of the way that we're interacting with them through this negotiation process, or whatever you might seem? Because that's really important. You start to think, okay, well, if they're this motivated purely by the bottom line, do they care about what we are as a business, what we're doing as a business? Are they going to be here X amount of time? And you start asking yourself those questions, and you start asking yourself those questions throughout the process. So I think it's really interesting. I mean, there are some businesses that do enter markets that I've worked in, and deliberately position themselves as, we're new, we're going to be paying you more than the local competitors, and they do okay out of that. And I think that, combined with a shift of people's priorities being more to the bottom line, means they've been a bit more successful than historically. But I think in some respects it's really early to say. We're still in the middle of this. I'm a data-led person. You've had some really good statistics at the start, but I think, as Richard said, 3 months and these statistics are out of date. It's moving so fast. That's the other thing. Everything is moving faster than before, in terms of the dip with COVID, in terms of the uplift after COVID, and now the still going in the direction that it is. So I think things are just moving so fast. It's hard for employers to keep up. As a people leader as well, involved in some of those conversations about uplifting people's salary based on performance, time at the organization, and it's really hard to keep up with the market, because as people know, there's a budgeting process. You set this aside, and then 6 months later inflation is X amount, and it's really challenging to add that on top of what you already had planned for. Again, Richard's comment earlier about agility, I think that means agility is more important than ever.
And I guess, yeah, go on, Rich.
No, I was going to say, it's I think you're right about the stats. So I think we've got stats obviously which show post-COVID increased, resignation increased again. We're due the next set of results now. I think what you will probably see, in my opinion, rather than fact, is that they'll go down again, because I think there's a general unease or uncertainty in the UK now that nobody really knows what's going on. And I think, to coin a phrase, someone else's phrase, the only certainty right now is uncertainty, in the fact that diesel prices highest ever, energy price cap looking to top $3,000 a year in terms of their energy by sort of January next year. I think in times of uncertainty, people almost, I don't want to say revert to type, but they go back to what they know. And I think there's probably, whilst people want to, use our sort of business model, they want to freelance. I think there's an attractiveness to employment now because it feels safer. And I think you will see that resignation dipping, and people probably doing not what they want to do in their sort of heart, but their head is saying, grab as much certainty as you can, and therefore full-time is what we know is certain.
I think one thing that is interesting is HR departments, leaders in organizations that I've conversed with recently, their sort of default is to say, okay, attrition's going up. How do we invest in, retention? What can we do? And it understandably has become very sort of reactive. And it, my perspective and my take on it is, people need to accept that there is going to be a level of higher attrition. And actually, they're looking too short term in what can we do to retain people, and actually it would be better off investing longer term, or investing in continued talent attraction strategy, or a longer term sort of culture view and learning and development. But I think understandably businesses are panicking and going, okay, what can we do now to help retention? And I don't think they can do anything. I think we're in this position where the market is what it is, and so many people are looking, will find opportunities that have a bigger bottom line. And I think that's a real challenge for the industries as a whole, and of course leaders particularly.
Do you think that's generational as well? So in terms of, like, with the millennials coming through, my kind of my parents' sort of ethos was job for life, getting a good job with a good pension, staying in it for 40 years. And I couldn't think of anything worse than being in the same company for 40 years. Whereas Kamila's already touched on it. It's almost like, I'm as free as I can be. And I'll put the words into sort of Kamila's mouth for her. It's almost like, well, what's the worst that can happen? I lived through a pandemic where millions have died. It's like, if I quit and I don't have a job, or I take this job and I'm not sure it's quite right, what's the worst that can happen?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely a long-term trend that has been accelerated, exacerbated by some of these, market conditions that we've seen, and I think as well, clearly the types of roles, again, I talk about the tech industry and sector, we've seen shorter tenure pre-COVID over the last 5 years anyway in roles, because they're still quite in demand roles now more than ever. But even pre-COVID, the type of people that we were hiring were starting to work with cloud technologies and those types of things were so in demand anyway that we're seeing shorter tenures from that perspective. So yeah, I think long-term trend anyway, and even more so with some of the sort of recent developments.
In terms of attracting talent, we've discussed two key things, right? We've discussed like the flexibility and remote working, and we discussed salary. These seem to be sort of two key things that companies touch upon to attract new talent or retain new talent. And I was wondering, Alec, from your perspective, do you find that companies are more likely to go one way than the other, like more likely to offer remote working than increase his salary, or more likely to increase his salary than remote working?
No, I don't. I think the big challenge is a lot of them are doing both, remote working and attractive salaries. Companies I've worked for are really striving to get a balance between, as I say, what we're calling hybrid working, and creating a culture and environment in which people do, create a connection with in a way, as well as providing them the flexibility that's required. And again, I think flexibility with hybrid working is very almost close to remote working, but it's not a situation where you're going to have a home-based contract. It's like, hey, you can work how you want to work, but this is your local office and this is your base technically. So that's how companies I've worked with have primarily approached it. And again, it'd be interesting to see the reality of people who have been working remotely for a prolonged period of time, how they feel in 6 months, a year's time, how how they feel about that social aspects of their life. I think there's going to be a mix of opinions on that. I'm interested, I guess, Kamila, in your example of an organization that did a lot of social things, parties, etc. You reflected on that in a certain way. Do you think there is still a place for that from your perspective in the future, depending on how things go?
I think it really is mixed, and maybe it's going to be very divided between different type of people. My good friend still works for that same company, and I know they are back in the office now, 5 days a week. And she's quite happy to be in the office, so she's quite more productive in the office. Whereas I've also heard of many people leaving because of it. And it's such a divided opinion that I wonder if there's going to be almost like a divide between companies. These are companies that are more focused on remote. These are more companies that are focused on sort of going in the office, and it's going to come up with a very divided strategy of attracting those specific candidates. Or are companies gonna come in and actually let people decide how they want to work, and focus more on that? I'm not sure how that's going to turn out, actually.
And I think, Camilla, that's the thing though, isn't it? Like, these debates are typically either or. And actually, so you take a HR policy, it's pretty black and white in terms of we do this, we do that, do whatever. I think you're going to have to allow people, if you're going to get the right mix of talent, allow people to work how they want to work. And I wouldn't work well in an office at all. You might work brilliant in an office. The two can work together. Whereas normally you have a work from home policy or in an office. Elon Musk, everyone back in the office. Well, that's a very polarized view compared to, Deloitte's going, everyone work from home. You're not going to get the best out of your workforce with those two black and white strategies. It needs to be a hybrid, as Alec is called.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because in my work for BGSS, we're a company that were very social in that respect, and have, I guess the word we would use is encouraged people, but without any need to come back into office. And quite a lot of people have done, but then a lot of practicalities that you didn't think about present themselves. So for example, if, to Richard's point, you get a mix and say, hey, look, it's down to you. Well, you get a lot of people coming to the office that before would have collaborated in the office, and now they're on video calls all day because the other people they're collaborating with are working from home, which is one, sort of slightly defeating the purpose of that social aspect to come into office, and two, present some practicalities around the space that you have in the office. Because what BGSS were looking at around the time that I've just moved on is things like, okay, well, do we have space for people to take video calls? Because previously there were so fewer people doing that we haven't set up our office in order to do, and then that takes time. So there's lots of these sort of micro things that are changing that understandably people hadn't considered, and are still in that sort of journey.
I think there's a big watch out as well. Sorry, David, I'll keep jumping in. There's a big watch out on working from home as well, because I think we talked about this on a previous podcast with Ross, is that technology's been there for ages. And actually, what it's done is that you've brought your office into the home, and you have to be quite militant about turning off and turning on, because your mobile phone's always been there and you can access it, but there's no some employees see that as there's no excuse anymore. You're at home, you've got your mobile. I was just looking at some stats here. Microsoft are saying that the average Teams user is sending 42% more chats after traditional working hours now. And is that a good or a bad thing? It depends. But I think you've really got to be careful with that working from home, that it doesn't become, this real, it takes over your life more so than the commute ever did.
But I think I'm going to try and sort of join all of this together, and sort of, I'm conscious of time, but I think the one thing that resonates to me that you mentioned, Alec, and also that you mentioned, Kamila, is culture. And I think the real driver of what the future will look like, because like you say, we're right in the middle of this right now. It's a very dynamic sort of environment, but I think businesses have got a hell of a lot of changes to make in terms of what their culture is, what they want their culture to be, how they want people to act, how they want them to interact with each other. And I think, I had a LinkedIn post removed because I called out Elon Musk's email as not particularly good. However, having reflected on it for the last 2 days, and in fact, I saw somebody else commenting on it, was that's the culture that Elon Musk wants to create at Tesla, because he's got a bunch of people on the shop floor. They can't do their jobs from anywhere else. So he wants everybody in their places working together collaboratively as a team to build and deliver and create these things. And if you've got half the workforce on the shop floor and half the workforce sort of working from home or working from remote locations, then he's not able to create a culture of sort of, that we're all in this together and we're all working to a common goal. So what I thought was how he worded it was probably a bit brusque and a bit sort of draconian, but it comes back to culture in terms of the culture that he wants to create in that business, and that's his choice, right? And if you want to work in a business that has got that culture, then that's your choice, and if you don't, that's your choice too. And I think that's probably where we're going to end up getting to in terms of, this is what it's like to work for this business. And Alec, I guess your role in that sort of people world is going to be a lot about, this is who we are, this is what we do, and this is how we operate. Are you on the bus? Oh, and by the way, because all of the sort of transactional stuff in terms of how much you're going to get paid, what's your pension, all of that stuff just becomes sort of academic in terms of, you want to get paid 50 grand here, or do you want to walk out the door and go next door and get paid 50 grand there? It's all the same, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say my views on Elon Musk aside, trying to put them aside, he's got a luxury of such a brand that other organizations would suffer more with their leader perhaps saying that and really struggle to attract talent. But the brand probably means they can. I think one thing that leaders, especially in industries where you talk about the shop floor and it perhaps being different, is look at productivity over COVID, over people having to work from home. My understanding and looking at the statistics.
Alec, your audio's gone really weird.
No.
Technology. There you go. That sounds a bit better. Rich, you're on mute. This is all collapsing.
There you go. Right, there we go. I'm back off mute now. I said I'll pick up while Alex sorts his audio out.
Am I back?
I don't disagree with you about cultures driving that, but and it happens. I was talking to somebody I used to work with, and their view was, we can't have a work from home policy because we build stuff. So if you imagine like Toyota shop floor, we build cars, and it causes a great amount of conflict between what you would traditionally call back office staff, marketing, sales, finance, and the people on the shop floor. If they're allowed to work from home, but they can't. I think at some point though, it doesn't have to be, again, why does it have to be a black and white conversation? Why does it have to be a unified approach? You clearly cannot have a Toyota production plant in your front office, but that's the job you've signed. Have that difficult conversation. But if you want to make the culture work, then why can't you have different policies for different roles? Just like you have different pay scales for different roles, just like you have different benefits for different roles. It's just a new iteration of the perks or benefits which come with a role.
Yeah, no, I mean, I can certainly see that. I think it's interesting in terms of the data, whether I think there might be a view that would breed resentment of management from people who are having to come into the office. I think that might be something that's there. I think, sorry, I think I might have got cut off. But the point I was making, I think, was, looking at productivity over COVID and when people had to work from home. My industry, or my understanding of the analytics, has been it was better than productivity when people were all in the office. Therefore, leaders who are going, people need to come back into the office. There's really very little data to suggest that is necessary, based on having worked through COVID.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. And on the productivity, last question. So 4-day week. People's thoughts. Obviously, the UK has just entered a pilot, 70,000 businesses taking part, I think, trialing a 4-day week. And I guess still early days, there's no data. Some pilots, I think they've done some pilots in Iceland, maybe Spain, I'm not sure, but it's still early days. Views on the 4-day week, folks? How's that going to work?
Doesn't the pilot, though, also do 4 days on 5 days wage as well? So there's no drop in wage, because that was the original conversation, where it was almost like, we'll do you 4 days, but you're only going to get paid for 4 days, which then people are like, well, I'm not going to drop 10 grand a year for 4 days. Personally, I'll be very honest with it now. I think I've had people work compressed hours, and I've not noticed any drop off. I think in reality, sometimes they do log back on that Friday just to clear a bit off if they want to. There should be no pressure on that. Ultimately, I think you can find many ways within an office to lose a day of productivity. Anyway, Dave, we've been there. Breakfast Fridays. Let's all go and have a full fry between 9 and 10. That's an hour gone of that day. I think, yeah. I don't see why it wouldn't work.
Yeah, interestingly, actually, Richard, you said, a lot of people probably won't accept lower wage. Personally, I would. I would happily drop 10 grand to work 4 days a week. Maybe I wouldn't say that 10 years from now. Obviously, I'm young, no mortgage, as I mentioned. But I actually, I used that for negotiation when I was looking at, going back full time. And, I mentioned that, and, some businesses weren't ready for it. Some were, some even were discussing the idea of keeping the same wage. But I think in terms of a 4-day week, as you mentioned, maybe this is like a chance for businesses to rethink and review like the efficiency of our tasks. How much do we focus on our jobs? How much time do we spend on tasks that aren't bringing us any results in the first place? And with a 4-day week, a lot of companies, I think, and a lot of people tend to see it as like a stigma around, do we just want like a weekend to just to be lazy, when really, in reality, one, it's always obviously all about work-life balance. We realized how much it's important for us to build relationships with people around us, and how important that is for our own mental well-being and for our own productivity. But also for me, when I did a 4-day week, I used the other day to work on myself, my development, my interests. I did courses. I worked on things that helped me become better at what I do when I do work those 4 days at a job. And to me, that was priceless. That was really important to me, and it's still really important to me. That's why I had to take that cut.
I think in some respects it's similar to the remote in-office debate, in that okay, let's say you have a mix of some people that are working 5 days a week and some people that are working 4 days a week. Is that achievable, or should everyone work 4 days a week? Because when you've got 5 days a week, is there a meeting that someone's going to miss out on? Are people going to resent the other people? There's all of these things. I think one of the things to, and perhaps it's down to individuals and their ability to manage this, but I know people who've worked part-time, who work, X amount of days a week, and they end up doing compressed hours even though they're not meant to. They're working longer because their work commitments mean that they feel they need to do more in order to keep up, and that's for the business to manage, and the businesses need to really be better at that in order to provide an environment to do that. Interestingly, I think there is a shift. A friend of mine who's in his early 30s, he started working 3 days a week from requesting it to his employer, one of the former employers that I worked at. I think, again, a previous generation, it'd be unheard of almost for someone in their 30s to go, hey, can I do 3 days a week? But they're doing that, and I think it's great that people have the option and that businesses do support that. But I think it'll be a long journey to see wider adoption of a 4-day week potentially.
But I think ultimately it comes down to outputs, right? So again, if you're going to pay somebody full salary and they're going to work 4 days, you want 100, you get paid 100% salary, you want 100% outputs, which, I mean, we've been banging this flipping drum for years in terms of measure me on outputs, not on the time I'm sat at my desk spinning around, or like you say, Rich, having a full Friday fry up. It's not about presenteeism, right? It's about what you deliver. And I think it's really, it's just a mind shift, because as much as we say, measure us on outputs, we charge our folk on a day rate, and it's kind of it's crazy. There's a whole sort of shift in how we all need to operate and how we need to think about stuff. But I think, Kamila, the point you made is absolutely right, and we have this conversation with clients in terms of, we need somebody 5 days a week, but we don't have the budget, we can't afford that person for that, we'll have them for 4 days. And we've had that conversation a number of times, and they've ended up with the right person for that, within budget for that amount of time, and then they get the outputs that they want. So we're still on the journey. I think
that's also linked to a more inclusive and diverse workforce in a lot of respects, because I say before, I work in sort of consultancy, and we have challenges because we have end clients around part-time and those sort of things. So I think 4-day week and just a greater flexibility of mindset and the ability to offer that type of thing will be good for people from different backgrounds, people returning from maternity leave, for example, and those type of things that traditionally have perhaps struggled to get into that next level of role, or be able to balance life and work commitment. So it could open up a new sort of market of labor and people getting into things that wouldn't, which I think is a great thing, and I think should be supported. But I thought we might get there through more flexibility of our current working arrangements than more of a formal sort of 4-day week. But it'd be really interesting to see how it goes.
And I guess the points, when we open this around the fall in employment market, or the amount of the labor market, it's just less people, right? So you can get more done by having more people that would traditionally be excluded, working part-time, working day or two a week, get those people back involved that works around the other things that they want to do, whatever that is, whether it's childcare, looking after family, or whatever. There's all sorts of ways that actually you can supplement shortfall potentially in capacity with flexible work and different sort of modes of working. Good stuff. Right, that was really excellent conversation. I could spend hours talking about that. So I really hope you've enjoyed it. It was great to have you all on board. I really appreciate your time, and thank you. Really insightful, really valuable. As always, we'll have another one coming up soon. Stay tuned for that. If you'd like to find out some more about us, then pay a visit to our website, theimgroup.co.uk. And if you are a kick-ass marketing superstar and you want to join us as one of our community members, then go to theimgroup.co.uk/join and say hello, and we would love to have a chat with you. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming along. Really appreciate your time. Thanks for joining, and we'll catch you all on the next one. Cheers.